Jane walked into the house Sunday night after her weekend away. "Honey, I'm home." There was no reply. She checked the bedroom and bathroom, backyard, and study. Nothing. Only the lounge room light was on. The rest of the house was in darkness. Going back out to the garage, she confirmed that Dave's car was still there. Strange, she thought. Shrugging, she went to fix herself a snack. When there was still no sign of Dave by 10 p.m., she tried his cell. No answer. Just like Saturday night, and this morning, she thought. At midnight, she rang the police. They told her that they could do nothing until a person had been missing for one complete night. Despite her exhaustion, she found sleep difficult. This was all very un-Dave-like behavior. She decided not to go to work the next day, but killed time until 8 a.m. and rang the police again. The duty operator put her through. She told the story that she'd come home last night, but had been unable to contact her husband since Friday. They promised to send someone around within 2 hours. Jane rang Dave's cell several times while she waited. Just before 10, the doorbell rang, and Jane ushered in 2 uniformed officers. She related all she thought was relevant. "Madam, there are several common signs we look for in missing persons cases that give us an idea whether the person might have chosen to disappear of their own volition or whether foul play is a possibility." They then asked where Dave kept his car, wallet, phone, keys, and passport. Jane pointed out Dave's keys hanging from their hook and took them to the garage to show them his car. They gave it a quick inspection but found nothing of interest. Next, Jane opened the safe to show them Dave's passport, then opened his bedside cabinet. At this point, she started to get really worried. There was her husband's wallet. Where could he go where he wouldn't need that? The only thing missing was his phone. Before she could worry further, one of the policemen started asking quick-fire questions. The other stood well away just watching. "Can you tell us about your husband, Mrs. Brown? Where does he work?" "We have our own business, Havelock Industries. Do you know it?" The policeman nodded. "Dave is the CEO, and I help out in the office. General admin duties, help with the books and stuff like that." "Wow, you must be loaded," asked the officer. "Well, yes. We can afford all the best things in life, yes." "And you say that this is completely abnormal behavior for your husband? Has he ever disappeared before?" "No, never. My Dave is a creature of habit. You could set your watch just by looking at his routine most days." "How would you describe your marriage, Mrs. Brown?" asked the officer. "What are you trying to imply?" "What I mean is, was your husband happy? Could he have run away with his secretary or something like that?" Jane gave a short laugh. "Well, for a start, I'm his secretary. Secondly, Dave would never do anything remotely like that. I'm his life. He is completely devoted to me." "Okay, Mrs. Brown. Now, can I ask for your whereabouts last weekend?" "I went to visit my sister in Colville. I left Friday night and got home Sunday just after 7 p.m. "You drove?" the officer asked. "Yes, it's only a 3-hour drive." "Okay, Mrs. Brown. That's all I can think to ask at the moment. Can you give us your husband's cell number, all his bank account numbers, personal and business, plus any credit card numbers he uses? Also, a list of his friends, his and your family members with their contact details, please." "Why do you need all the bank account and credit card numbers?" she asked. "Well, we know he left his wallet behind, so if he is out there, he needs money to live." "You said there were signs that indicated whether he had left of his own accord or whether something bad may have happened. What does it look like?" "Sorry, Mrs. Brown, but apart from the missing phone, nothing else looks particularly good." It took Jane about 15 minutes to get all their requested information. Then she showed them to the door. "We'll keep you posted. Of course, if he shows up, you will let us know, won't you?" "Of course," Jane replied. The 2 policemen left. Once they were in their car, the senior one turned to his partner. "Well, that stank." "What do you mean?" "Didn't you notice how defensive she got when you asked about the state of their marriage? Then she stuttered when you asked where she'd been for the weekend. I tell you, John, I think we should fast-track this one. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Is her sister's phone number on that list she gave us? I think that would be a bloody good place to start. 2 days later, there was still no sign of Dave. Jane was getting frantic with worry. She rang the police at least twice a day, but there was never any news. Wednesday morning, the same 2 policemen from Monday showed up at the office and asked to speak to her. She took them into Dave's office for some privacy. This time, it was the senior officer who did all the talking. "Mrs. Brown, on Monday you told us that you had spent all weekend with your sister in Colville, right?" "Yes," she replied. "Care to tell us why you were lying, Mrs. Brown?" This floored Jane. It had been pure reflex that she'd stuck to the sister story last time. She wasn't someone comfortable with lying. Well, not till a year ago, that was. Now it was practically second nature. "I never wanted Dave to find out." "Find out what, Mrs. Brown?" asked the senior officer. "That I wasn't at my sister's." "Where were you, Mrs. Brown?" asked the officer. "At the Hilton across town." "Were you alone?" "No," she answered. "Who were you with?" the officer asked. "I don't want to say." "Well, it's your choice, Mrs. Brown. Either you tell us now, or we arrest you, take you down to the station, and you tell us there." "What? Arrest me? Why?" "Well, look at it from our point of view, Mrs. Brown. Your husband disappears and all the signs point to foul play. There are also some other things which we won't go into now, but believe me when I say we have ample reason to detain you. So, your choice. Who were you with at the Hilton all weekend?" "A man," she replied. The policeman asking the questions grinned at his partner in triumph. Jane missed the interchange. She was too busy looking at the floor, face flushed. The officer turned to Jane and asked, "Who, Mrs. Brown?" "Dennis Smith," Jane replied. "Your lover, Mrs. Brown?" asked the officer. "Yes," Jane answered. "And did you leave the hotel any time between Friday and Sunday nights?" the officer asked. "No. The only time I left the room even was to go to the restaurant to eat," Jane responded. "Can you say the same for Mr. Smith?" the officer asked. "No. He left for about 2 hours Saturday afternoon. Said he had some personal business to attend to," Jane explained. "Where can we find this Dennis Smith?" the officer inquired. Jane hesitated before answering. This was spiraling out of control. "Across the hall. He is my husband's deputy," Jane admitted. A look of distaste crossed the policeman's face. "Is it possible, Mrs. Brown, that your husband found out about your adultery and abandoned you?" the officer suggested. "No. We were very discreet. My husband could never know," Jane responded emphatically. "Can you ask Mr. Smith to come in here, please, madam, then leave us alone?" the officer requested. Without a word, Jane stood up and walked into Dennis's office. "Dennis, the police are here. They know about us. They want to talk to you," Jane said. "Damn!" Dennis exclaimed. Dennis's face paled, and then slowly he stood and walked into Dave's office with the demeanor of a man walking to the gallows. Jane sat in reception for the next 45 minutes, her mind in a turmoil of dread. For the first time, she really thought about her affair with Dennis. Until now, she had partitioned it into the emotional, too hard basket. Boredom had been the instigator. Intimacy with the same man for so many years had just become routine. Dave had stopped asking her for anything new and exciting years ago, so it had just become unexciting. When Dennis had made his wishes known for a special relationship, Jane had hardly hesitated. It added the excitement she was missing. Generally, there was very little guilt on her part, except for that one time. It had been about 4 months into her infidelity when Dennis had suggested yet another thing that she'd never tried before. She'd experienced a momentary flashback to her husband, suggesting precisely the same thing many years before, in almost exactly the same words. Of course, she had refused him. It was way too bad for her tastes. The vague thought had entered her mind that maybe she was mostly to blame for the routine nature of love with Dave. The thought was brushed aside by the excitement of the new experience, and afterward was buried deep. Just one more thing to enhance her naughty experience by hiding. Her secret weekend hadn't ended well. Friday night, Dennis had suggested they each file for divorce from their spouses and marry. Jane had immediately shot that down. She had no intention of leaving Dave. Dennis had pressed again on Saturday until things became quite heated. Words were said in the heat of the moment that made Jane suspect that Dennis was keen to get her half of the company. Instinctively, Jane knew not to mention the real reason Dennis had disappeared for 2 hours Saturday night to the police. He had stormed out. Yes, he had come back, and yes, they had made love, but Jane knew the affair was doomed and had begun the process of emotionally divorcing her lover. She knew it had to be done carefully to prevent anything from changing suddenly, which might alert her husband. After the police left, she and Dennis talked until the end of the day, discussing all the possible implications. With heavy hearts, they went their separate ways at 6 p.m. Jane to her suddenly lonely house, Dennis to his wife. Sleep eluded them both. Jane was woken by heavy knocking on the front door at 7 a.m. the next day. She opened the door to be greeted by a man in a suit, holding a badge in front of her face. Behind him stood 2 uniformed policemen and 2 men in disposable coveralls. "Mrs. Brown, I'm Detective Danny Bourgeois. We have a warrant to search these premises. We also have a warrant to search your business premises. We would appreciate you giving us your computer login information and your husband's if you have it." "Why, am I a suspect?" Jane asked. "No. We're just looking for clues about where your husband might be, Mrs. Brown." In a daze, Jane complied with their requests, writing the requested passwords on a slip of paper. On further request, she handed over the keys to the office. While the small army invading her house was busy, she rang Dennis's cell. There was no answer, so she rang the landline. Dennis's wife, Andrea, answered. Despite being only 5 foot 2 inches tall, Andrea could have passed for a model. She had short blonde hair, worn in a boyish cut, under which was a round face. Alabaster skin surrounded light sky blue eyes and puffy lips. Her 38D chest and flawless skin had always made Jane envious, especially so as the package was sealed with a genuinely honest and fiercely loyal personality. She was less likely to cheat on her husband than a Frenchman living next door to a brothel was to move house. Not for the first time, Jane wondered why the hell Dennis would choose her over his wife. "Jane, do you know why we have 6 policemen tramping all over my carpets?" "No, Andrea. I've got the same over here. It must be something to do with Dave's disappearance." "What? Dave has disappeared?" Dennis didn't say anything. "What does that have to do with us?" Andrea questioned. "I don't know, Andrea. Can I speak to Dennis?" "He's tied up with the police right now. Look, Jane, what's going on?" Andrea asked. "I have no idea, Andrea. Sorry, I've got to go. Bye." As she returned the phone to its charging cradle in the kitchen, Jane saw one of the technicians kneeling on the floor with a strange-looking torch. She left the house. In the garage, the other technician was inside Dave's car. She made to get in her car, but the technician stopped her. "We haven't done that one yet, madam." With no escape, Jane sat in her den and listened to some relaxing music. The boys in blue left at about 2 p.m. with no words of comfort and her car. Jane drove to the office in Dave's car. No one said she couldn't. The police had left a bit of a mess in reception, plus Dave and Dennis's offices. Dennis was already there, and they exchanged words of comfort. Their recent animosity is forgotten in their shared fear. Jane pushed him away when he tried for a hug, reminding him that they could never show anything in public. They managed to keep their emotional and physical separation up until the weekend. Then, desperate, frightened, and alone, Jane rang Dennis, and they met at their usual hotel for a brief interlude. She shut him down angrily when he groped her back, but allowed a companionable cuddle. The whole meeting turned out to be a disaster for Jane. Obviously racked with guilt and fear, Dennis actually cried. This opened Jane's eyes. She started to see the veil that had clouded her consciousness begin to lift. Had she really risked her happy marriage, her sweet, loving husband, for this wimp? An hour later, the decision was clear. No bloody way. That was when the guilt and remorse really set in. She cried herself to sleep Saturday and Sunday nights and hardly slept a wink. Two things drove her insomnia. The first was her firm belief that her husband had discovered her betrayal and harmed himself. The second was guilt. Oh yes, she'd had it all along, but she'd done a brilliant job of burying it deep. Now it emerged with a vengeance. Consequently, when Detective Bourgeois woke her up on Monday morning, she was almost incapable of rational thought. "Mrs. Brown, would you agree to accompany me to the police station?" Detective Bourgeois asked. "Yes, of course," Jane replied. "I have to tell you, Mrs. Brown, that you are entitled to legal representation," the detective informed her. Jane had given some thought to this. In the back of her mind, she'd known the police hadn't finished with her. "No, that's fine, Detective. Do I come in your car, or can I use mine?" Jane asked. "Mine will be fine, madam," the detective responded. The short drive to the station was a silent one. All the while, Jane wondered if it was bad news. Had they found Dave? As they pulled into the station, she saw Dennis being led into the building. Danny showed her into an interview room where they were joined by a female detective who wasn't introduced. Once they were settled, the questions came. "I just want you to be aware that this conversation is being recorded. Can you state for the record that you agree with that?" "Yes, I agree with that," Jane replied. "Can you also confirm that you have not requested legal representation?" "Yes, that is correct," Jane answered. "For the record, Mrs. Brown, we have been monitoring your husband's bank and credit card accounts for the last week, and there has been absolutely no activity since the Saturday morning you were away." "What about his cell phone activity?" Jane asked. "I'll get to that. Mrs. Brown, a week ago, 2 of my colleagues attended your house when you reported your husband, David Brown, missing. Is that correct?" "Yes, that is correct," Jane answered. "During said visit, they asked you to account for your whereabouts the previous Saturday and Sunday. You stated that you had been visiting your sister. Subsequent investigations proved that was untrue, and you later admitted to spending the weekend in a hotel with Mr. Dennis Smith. Can you tell me why you lied, Mrs. Brown?" With her blatant untruths thrown in her face like that, Jane felt very embarrassed again. Thus it was again after a pause that she replied, "I didn't want my affair to become public knowledge." Danny turned to the lady sitting away from the table. They exchanged nods. Having successfully disconcerted her, Danny continued questioning Jane. "Mrs. Brown, do you know the passwords for all your husband's business accounts?" "Of course it is my business as well," Jane answered. "Did Mr. Dennis Smith also have access to the company accounts?" "Yes, of course. He is the chief financial officer." "Okay. Are you aware that on the Friday before your trip, the sum of $8.3 million was transferred to the personal account of Mr. Dennis Smith and then immediately transferred to an untraceable account in the Cayman Islands? That sum represented almost all of your company's working capital. Can you account for your whereabouts at 1:17 p.m. on that Friday, Mrs. Brown?" Jane had a sudden sinking feeling. What time had she disappeared with Dennis into one of the stock rooms out the back that day? This was just getting worse and worse. She became aware that both detectives were still waiting for her to answer. "No, I can't. I would have been at work, though. If I can get my diary, I should be able to confirm that." "Maybe later, Mrs. Brown. I have to say we suspect that your husband is dead," the detective answered. "No, that can't be." "Look at the evidence, Mrs. Brown. Absolutely no action on any of your husband's accounts. No sightings. We know he hasn't left the country, as his passport is still here." Jane tried to interrupt with the information that as Dave had dual citizenship, he had 2 passports. But Danny knew his stuff and refused to let her regain her composure. He interrupted again. You asked about your husband's cell phone before, Mrs. Brown. I have to tell you that with the cooperation of your husband's service provider, it was found in a dumpster 1 block away from your business premises on Tuesday of last week. With it was found a quantity of plastic sheeting. Both the phone and the sheeting showed evidence of blood that has been identified as the same type as your husband's. Do you have any comment, Mrs. Brown? Jane went as white as a sheet. If something had happened to Dave, she would be devastated. The detectives watched the look of horror invade her face and completely misinterpreted it. No, Jane answered quietly. Danny Bourgeois was one of a new breed of detectives, a product of a deliberate recruiting policy, ruggedly handsome, with a natural ability to put people at their ease, unassumingly intelligent, but with a slightly checkered past. How can I put this? Let's just say that before his recruitment, he was already known to the police. The combination of intelligence, disarming demeanor, and insight into the criminal mind had ensured his quick rise through the ranks. With his instinctive approach, he knew the secret was to keep suspects off balance, so he plunged on. Then maybe you can explain where the trace of a large bloodstain came from, found on your kitchen floor and also confirmed as your husband's blood type. At this point, all Jane was capable of was looking at the floor and shaking her head. Mixing it up a bit to cause further confusion, Danny pressed on. For the record, Jane Brown is shaking her head. Mrs. Brown, would you like to comment on the prenuptial agreement found in your safe, which clearly states that all assets from the marriage between yourself and David Brown go to the offended party in the case of proven infidelity? For the record again, the suspect is shaking her head. Are you aware, Mrs. Brown, that during a search of the premises of Mr. Dennis Smith, a fishing knife was found? Attempts had been made to clean it, but it showed traces of human blood, again with a type shared by your husband. For the record again, the suspect is shaking her head. Lastly, Mrs. Brown, can you account for a quantity of blood, of your husband's type, found in the trunk of your car? A car that by your statement was parked at the Hilton Hotel from Friday night to Sunday night. That blood was tested as being spilled somewhere on Saturday evening plus or minus 12 hours. The full gravity of her situation finally began to dawn on her, as well as a deadly certainty. It was fully 5 minutes before she responded. The two detectives seemed happy to let her take her time. I think I need a lawyer, Jane answered. Jane Brown, I am arresting you for the murder of David Brown. You do not have to say anything, but anything. At that point, Jane fainted. Jane was remanded overnight until 11 a.m. the next day, when a judge set her bail at $250,000 and ordered her to surrender her passport. She was able to access a loan account to transfer the money to a business account. She caught a cab home. That night, the absolute shell of a woman who had been on top of the world a mere 8 days before, contemplated the future. A woman that once had everything. She had accepted the fact that her husband was dead. What she couldn't face was the realization that she'd caused it. The guilt and remorse she felt almost stopped her heart. She tried to imagine Dave's face in happier times, but images of him gasping his last breath on her kitchen floor prevented that. The mental image of his plastic-wrapped face staring at her as the trunk closed ate into a soul no longer armored by denial. She sat in the kitchen in a daze. The phone rang and the beaten shell automatically answered it. It was Dennis. Jane, you have to help me. I rang Andrea and she said she's left me and cleared out our bank accounts. You have to bail me out, please. Okay, Dennis, Jane answered. She went back online and transferred another $250,000 from the loan account. Using her newfound knowledge, she was able to pay the second bond. The next day, shortly before lunch, Dennis rang again. Thanks, lover. Can I come and see you? I really need a hug right now. Okay, Dennis. See you soon, Jane answered. As soon as she heard the cab pull up outside, she stood up and went to the door. The shell of Jane Brown opened the door. Whatever tiny part of her sanity remained snapped when she saw an ogre standing on her porch. "You lying, murdering bastard! You killed my Dave!" Raising her husband's pistol, she pulled the trigger. She didn't see the look of shock on its face as the monster was blown backward, a .45-inch hole in the center of its chest. It went down so fast that the second bullet went over its head. The last 6 hit, though, smacking into the twitching body lying on the path. With the gun still clutched in a suddenly limp fist, something slumped to the top step with its back against the doorframe as the spirit of Jane Brown fled. Ruth arrived at her sister's house, mentally prepared for the grim task of putting Jane's affairs in order. Noticing there was mail in the box, she retrieved it. Mostly bills, but one postcard. With the common logic of, if people wanted to keep the message on postcards private, they would use an envelope. She picked it up. On the front was a photograph of a beautiful beach on Grand Cayman. On the back, simply the words, "Wish you and Dennis were here. Love D&A." What was that all about? She kept going into the house. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.